It's always fuck it. Hi, welcome. We're Frequency Broads. We're happy to have you here listening to us. It's episode 2. I gotta say, I always get like a quick download after we record an episode that like just basically summarizes it into like 30 seconds or less. And essentially what I got from how I'm treating my personal practice these days is that I feel I'm kind of a snob because I feel like I can quickly access information in a way where I don't have to sink in to certain practices. However, the importance of being in certain practices is to care for your vessel and to care for the channel in which you receive the information. So while I feel like I've gotten a little spiritually cocky by just receiving messages very easily, it is so important for me to keep my energy clear. And it's not necessarily about channeling, but it's more about just getting the crud out of my aura and out of my field and just doing like energetic housekeeping. So if you didn't listen to our last episode on our personal practice, that was my spiel in a nutshell. But Tara shared a lot of amazing stuff too. Hi, welcome. Are we doing the damn thing or what?
Yeah.
We're recording a little later than we usually do, and so we're kind of in nighttime mode, after hours mode.
Yes. I feel like, speaking of ovulation phase, I finished mine like yesterday, and I already am like, oh, now I'm more tired and I feel more puffy. All it takes is that one day for that shift.
I feel that, sister. Or a little bit of salt or a full moon. So we're talking about disappointment today. Something that I like how I can't help but laugh when I say it because I've just lived in a state of disappointment for so much of my life that to now talk about it on the internet is next level. This is going to be very therapeutic for us. Let's go share in this experience.
You know what's funny? So when I came back from winter break, back to school, and I was going to check in with my middle schoolers. I had a plan on where we were going to go with it, similar to last year about perspective and projecting and all that. And then I just checked in with them and I was like, well, kind of like what is on your radar right now? Like, so I can tweak my units. I like to plan ahead, but I'm in a school where I'm lucky enough to very much work intuitively. And guess what they fucking said?
What?
They were like, can we learn how to handle disappointment, like how to deal with disappointment? And I was like, that was last week. That was like on Wednesday. I was like, okay, well, I was like, let me record on Sunday and then I'll get back to you guys on what we talk about on dealing with disappointment. So I was like, okay, that was my talk about living ritual. That was my synchronicity of like, yes, this is the topic that you need to be talking about. The collective is literally asking for you to kind of dive into that a little bit. So as much as it is late and I'm a little bit more tired, I am ready to talk about this topic.
Well, I feel like when we started talking about it, when brainstorming our ideas for this season, you said something that like disappointment is expectations minus reality. Is that the equation? Expectations minus reality. And I mean, it really comes down to, I think, how do you act when you don't have things go your way? Like how is your character responding to how things aren't playing out in your mind? And I think for those of us with very active imaginations and also, being in expectations are kind of a little bitch, but I'm like, do we want to start with that?
I mean, that's where I was going to start as well, but
Free
before
check.
we do, yeah, bitch.
You go
Freak
first. You
check.
go
Okay,
first.
okay. So let's see. I'm just feeling very calm. Like I'm not
Mm.
very emotional at the moment. It's not that I'm like low energy per se. It's definitely later and I had a very busy morning and heading into that luteal
Luteal.
God, thank you. I'm like luteal phase. I'm like already starting to get like foggy brained. I am proud of myself because I've been trying to front load my chores and cooking on Sunday, especially during this phase of my period so that way I can relax all week, just worry about the things like day to day that I have to do for work and shit and just have dinner cooked. So I'm feeling good. I'm feeling relaxed. There's a lot that I want to touch upon for disappointment. So I'm ready to go. How you feeling, boo?
I feel really good. I feel neutral. I feel
Yeah.
in a state of in between. I feel like I've had so many downloads come through on this topic and new
Mm.
perspectives that I'm like, why didn't you teach me this like when I was going through it? And well, I mean, I'm sure I'll go through it soon enough and get to experiment with this wisdom. But I feel good. I feel grateful to be here. I actually feel like shit. I have a fever,
I'm like,
but
first of all,
I still feel good. It's weird. I'm like, I feel sick and dizzy and disoriented and detached and non-attached and
mm, that's a
but I still feel
energetic
good.
upgrade. That's an energetic upgrade sickness right there, girl. Your body, your nervous system, your all your systems are going through, but you're like, no, I'm good. I'm fucking chilling.
You know how it goes.
Always. Well, I feel like like you said, when we were thinking about this topic, I think we were both really sitting with disappointment in our own situations. And we were like, okay. Like it was very much one of those things where I was like, I think we were both just feeling upset and angry at certain things. And when we realized like it just boils down to disappointment, like all of this, like under the umbrella of just like being disappointed. And I don't even think we really talked about like what that felt like or meant to us. We were both just like, we need to talk about disappointment because this is crazy. And I know people are feeling it. And then,
Yeah.
so yeah, here we are. Both of us, I think, a little less disappointed by the time we're recording this episode, or at least not less disappointed. I think, like you said, like you gained a lot of knowledge about what to do with disappointment, and I think I did as well. And I think it's the whole point of going through the challenges, right? You get the wisdom after because you wouldn't have got it if you didn't go through it. So we're happy to be disappointed prior for you guys, so that way we can give you this knowledge. You're welcome.
Oh Lord. All right. You know, I guess I've just been reflecting on expectations and where they come from and having high expectations versus I think boundaries. We often get those well, I
Mm,
will speak for myself. I get those often they're a little fuzzy. Um but I think the expectation comes from us being able to see someone's potential, to see them for their soul, to
yep.
see, all that they are, but if they're not in a state where they can embody all that they are, we're going to be a little disappointed. And then what are you going to do about that, right? Like I always like the saying that was on the internet that we would bring up last season about what you're not changing, you're choosing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's not up to you to change other people. And I think oftentimes our disappointment comes from people or circumstances. And, you know, I'm like, do I even want to confess what I think the remedy is to disappointment? There are two actually that came to me, one in the shower and then one on my walk today. So it's legit. This is a
Yes,
legit
yes.
remedy. One, I think expectations are often accompanied with the dopamine rush of
Mm.
anticipation, right? Like you are just so excited for the way things are playing out in your mind, in your fantasy, and what is not yet reality. And so, you don't want to lose that sense of being a dreamer. Um, but also, like, there's a weird little fuzzy line, right? Because it's like what you think you create.
Mhm.
And so, if these circumstances that are playing in your mind are less than desirable, how do you shift them?
Yeah. Well, I wanna come back to, you mentioned, like, that you get them, like, expectations and boundaries kinda get, like, fuzzy together,
Yeah.
and I am, like, right there with you. I think that was a big realization for me too with what I went through with disappointment, because we're, I'm gonna say, highly empathetic, right? Because
Yes.
not everyone considers themselves an empath like maybe we do, but a lot of people who are like really empathetic to others will muddle their boundaries because we know who someone is at their core, and we're like, well, okay, if I just like back up a little bit and give them more space, or like, don't worry about that, or they made this mistake because I know who they are on the inside. But as you mentioned, there was a that like formula for disappointment. It was a study done on emotion and things like that and breaking it down and yada yada. I don't remember, but it was, yeah, expectation minus reality. So if you're expecting them to be who they are at their core when at this point in reality they're not, you're going to get disappointed. And if your only focus is on getting that expectation, you're going to muddle your boundaries. You're going to sit there and kind of get a little walked all over in order to be the one who understands, oh, I understand why they're not meeting my expectations. I totally get it why they're not. And that's beautiful. That's empathetic. But when are you going to be empathetic for yourself if it's really not helping you grow, or pleasuring you? So what's the fucking point? You know what I mean? Like, unless there's an option for change within that situation, right? Whatever you're not changing, you're choosing. If you have the option to change it, and then you can change your reality to meet those expectations, then disappointment becomes either less or non-existent.
I guess that's what people mean by going with the flow. I'm like, what a fun little concept, right? Like, but it's true. And there are moments in your lives where it's so much easier to just like go and be and experience what is. And expectations are so future oriented that it takes you
Mhm.
out of the present moment. And if you're not in the present moment, then you're not really offering your presence. And I mean,
And I
relationally
don't,
speaking, that's what it's about, your
yeah.
presence.
Yes. And I don't necessarily think that expectations are a bad thing, but I think we need to really assess our current reality to set expectations that are realistic, right? Like, even on ourselves, if I'm someone who hasn't worked out in months, for me to just have this expectation that I'm going to show up to work out like 4 times a week is fucking crazy because it's so separate from my reality. And, it does get very tricky, like Victoria mentioned, with like co creating your reality.
Mm.
But the piece about co creating your reality is A, letting go of that attachment to the expectation or the outcome, right? Because you create a reality that's free. Like, I don't know. I feel like you create your reality most successful when it's like aligned to your highest potential, your highest timeline, right? So being able to release attachment to the outcome, aka not getting disappointed in what's happening, you understand that if things don't work out that you're trying to bring into your reality, it's because it's not for your highest good,
That
right?
part, because it's often the things that we think we want, and we're like, "Why, God? Why? Why isn't this working out?"
Yeah.
And we never really, well, until after the fact, realize it doesn't work out for a reason,
Yeah.
but you
It's
don't need
always
to know
after
the
the fact.
reason in the
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it
But
comes back to trust. Is this another freaking episode
uh,
on trust?
every episode's on trust.
I'm done.
Well, that dude, well, that's what I was gonna say. Can you shift your expectations to the feeling of hope?
Ooh.
Right? That was something that came through for me is like they're both that anticipation of something greater in the future. Confirmation by Odie. Okay. Can we take this expectation for a better job, uh, a better situation in my relationship and have hope and faith that it will happen? Because then it becomes embodied within ourselves. We attract that reality, yada, yada. Expectations are where things get tricky because we become attached to them. And then that causes suffering. So it's like, ugh,
Hold up.
it makes me roll my eyes because I'm like, oh God.
Same, but also can
You know
we
what I mean?
debunk this saying in the spiritual world that I think kind of plays into this where it's like, oh, it's holding a vision.
Mm.
Hold the vision, right? Hold the vision. And what if you're holding a vision for something that actually isn't for your higher good and doesn't actually
Oof.
resonate with you? Because holding the vision is keeping you actually like further away from what is meant for you, such as staying in a relationship that ultimately isn't
Mm.
serving you.
That's so good.
Yeah, and I think that this is just a really good example of how some spiritual sayings or practices just don't align for every circumstance or every
Mm.
point of where you're at in your evolution. And that's okay. And it's not to be judged because it's helping someone in whatever circumstance they're in. And so it just may not be the medicine for your moment right now.
Mm. And I think too, with that non-judgmental piece is not judging yourself for getting disappointed, right? If
Mm.
you're sitting there and you're like, oh my God, I put such high expectations on myself or my partner or my job, and I shouldn't have done that because then it just led to disappointment. Like, that's okay because that is showing you that your reality is so separate from what you're desiring right now, but it
Yeah.
requires action steps on you, both energetically and physically, in order to create a closer reality. Like when I think of how I shifted my reality into something so different, it's not because I just sat there and waited for it. Like I put myself in situations that would allow the opportunity to come to me. So how can you shift or use disappointment as like a compass to be like, ah, okay, well, I was disappointed because my expectations were actually like this and they weren't met. So, what do I need to do in order to make that expectation a little bit closer?
Oh, I love that. Ooh. Because we exist in a spectrum of all kinds, and knowing
Mm-hmm.
how to play that spectrum for you and your own unique blueprint is essential.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I'm thinking about when it comes to expectations and where they come from, like it's not always just out of your imagination. It's often what we're
Mm-hmm.
mimicking that we see on television or social media or wherever we're getting our inspiration from. And so I
Mm-hmm.
encourage you, if you are kind of in this place of like, where did this pattern even come from? Or where did this thought, or why am I even thinking this way? Like, what are you consuming? Who are you
Mm.
around? And I know sometimes it's really hard to break away from friends or friend groups that you've probably been friends with for a long time, but they may not resonate or they may not be serving you. And so maybe removing yourself and objectively looking at like what it is that you actually think for yourself and not what's
Mm.
being projected onto you for you to think.
Mm-hmm. I know that ever since we got back on social media, I did, um, I really realized the detriment was then creating such expectations that actually don't matter to me.
Mm,
Like I've mentioned it to you, Victoria, like I'll see these couples on Instagram and I'm like, oh my God, look at what they're doing and look at how he's doing that. And like what and I'm like,
yeah.
then I put this expectation on my relationship. One, an expectation that I am not communicating. So how the fuck is that going to be met? Two, it's not actually my expectation from something I'm desiring. It's a comparison. and then feeling lack of because I'm not actually, I'm like, and it's like, oh my God, it all comes back to me again all the time. It's like my disappointment comes back to me and says, like, you're disappointed in your relationship because there's something happening within you that's
Yeah.
not being met. But I think a major thing in all cases is like, yes, coming back to you, but also when it does have to do with somebody else, because it's okay to have expectations at work, to have a good work and healthy work environment or a healthy relationship. That's where the line blurs for boundaries, of course, but
Or standards, right? Like,
or yes, that's another great word is
yeah,
standards.
yeah.
But that whatever you're not changing your or whatever you're not yeah, whatever
Changing
you're
your
not changing, you're choosing. Like that shit doesn't change unless you say something. Like Andrew would never act different if I never like asked him to. So a lot of times we have these expectations and they're not met just from the baseline of like you not telling someone you're expecting more.
And if they can't give you more, you can't be mad at them for it. Like, it just
Mm,
speaking of myself.
girl, let me tell you, Andrew and I have gone through a crazy couple months that I've chatted a little bit here and there. But I just said to him recently, I was like, there has been a time where I held myself back in my expectations or what I'm looking for in my reality because I'm empathetic and understood where you were and muddled my boundaries and I was like, you know what? Instead of getting disappointed, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tell you everything that I want, desire, and need in my reality of a relationship.
Hmm.
That it's not to make you angry, it's just for you to know. Like, that's it. Like, there are so many things that I thought I really said, but I didn't. And I just said, after that, after I feel like I've really come into my own and really know what I want and communicated that with you, then it's your choice to decide if that's something you're willing to give me or able to give me. Right. And then he can't be my one and everything. I need to offload that to my family, to my friends for support and things like that. So he comes to me and he's like, not that we've done this yet, but he comes to me and says, I can meet these expectations and standards, but I can't meet or I can't support you in these. You need to offload these to somebody else or yourself or whatever. And then again, the choice comes back to me to say, is that something that's fair enough or the reality that I want? And it becomes almost just like contractual, like when you're at a job and you're like, actually, I want this much money. And they're like, well, I'm willing to give you this much money. And you're like, nope, sorry, that's not going to work for me. I'll go somewhere else. Or like, yeah, okay, you know what? I could see that we got to compromise on this, blah, blah, blah. I still have standards for my worth, but I could also understand that like not everyone is going to be able to meet those standards all the time. There's nuance to it. But if we let go of that expectation, um, it's easier to shift away from disappointment.
I guess the other thing it comes down to on the other side of it, if you are someone who disappoints people or have disappointed someone.
So if you're a disappointment, listen up. Ears up.
It comes down to acceptance because we all want to be
Mm,
seen, heard, loved, understood. And so on the other side of things, it is, I think, equally as frustrating where you're like, here I am just trying my best. Like, just please see all
mm,
that I am and like focus on my good and not all the ways in which I am not meeting your
mm.
expectations. And so shifting to more of what you like about someone
Yes.
helps a whole
Or
lot. Hold on, can I share real quick that Tara and I
yeah.
for like a week until I got really mad at the person I was dating, we did this thing where
Oh yeah.
every day we would say one thing that we were grateful for about our partners, and it was
Mhm.
really beautiful and lovely, and I think the energy really shifted for me on my end, and
Me too.
yeah, it was a good little experiment.
Yeah, because you go to your buddy, like, or your friends to be like, let me unload my disappointments on you, right? I need someone
Yeah.
to like hear me and say, yeah, that is disappointing or that does suck. Because, I'll come to Victoria like angry. And really what's underneath that is just hurt. And I think that's another piece of this disappointment is when we're disappointed, there's a piece of anger too, right? Like, especially depending on what kind of fight or flight situation you are. Like, I'm a fighter. So when I'm disappointed, I'm angry first.
Yeah.
Um, and I've learned that anger is not a bad thing, but I also like don't need to like use that anger at the situation or the person. Like I can use it to fuel myself and be like, okay, anger is the fuel for change. So what is this anger trying to tell me? Like what is it telling me that needs to change? Then
Mhm.
I can go in and be like, I'm feeling hurt and the anger taught me this is what needs to change. And then again, it's setting that expectation. But when we go to our friends all the time and we're like, oh my God, and this, and blah, blah, blah," like, of course, I'm so grateful. We're so grateful to have somebody to just hear us and be like, that sucks, right? You need someone to just amp you up a little bit sometimes. But then that energy about your situation or partner is only going to be negative. And when I see Victoria next, I'll be like, "Oh, how is it? Is it still terrible? Like what? Like why is
Yeah.
that our first thought? It's so
Yeah.
hard." So it's a good practice. When you got mad, Andrew and I started doing it for each other.
I love good.
Yeah, and it was
That's
actually
a good idea.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
really beautiful because it almost made those expectations really clear.
Yeah.
In like a weird way because right boundaries are things where we're like hey here's where the wall is, these expectations are like here's where I want it to go. So when we were able to do it in gratitude it became less like shackling and I was like oh I'm really grateful that you called me just to hear my voice when you were at work. And he was like, and now that's a ping for him to be like, oh shit, I'm going to do that more. Right. Cause that's what
Mhm.
something she's grateful for. Or he said to me, like, I'm really grateful that you're able to communicate your feelings calmly. So I know, like, and I don't have to guess. And I was like, okay, like I know that that's a good thing, but also there's that fear brain that's like, what if I'm saying too much? Fear of rejection, right? So now that gratitude just showed me, okay, the expectation is to keep doing that for both of us, right? That meets both of our needs. So that was a really good kind of shift out of disappointment.
Beautiful. Did you hear that? Oh. Is this one where we just don't talk about disappointment for, like, the entire time? I'm like,
No, I think we really have. We've been talking a lot about expectations more than disappointment. But I think that's okay.
so what are reasonable expectations to have? I mean, we love to talk about our relationships, right? And so I think getting really clear at the beginning of a
Mhm.
relationship as to, your love languages, how you like to both give and receive,
Mhm.
essential. Um, Defining cheating, essential.
Mhm.
That's something I think every couple should talk about at the very beginning. Like,
Oh, that was like day 1 for me. I was like, here's
really?
the yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Well, yeah. I was going to go into the story and I'm like, maybe not.
Yeah, no. Um,
So I guess it's hard to say like what are good expectations because everyone's so individual, right? Like you said like your love style or just like fight or flight, like how you handle stress, what kind of support do you need when you're down, or when you're not down, just what kind of support do you need? So I guess what I would say is like to figure out your expectations is first like thinking about if some expectation comes up, is that coming from love or from fear? Right? Is my expectation that you do this because I'm fearful you're going to leave me or I'm fearful because of a situation in my past, which, mind you, that is your work to do, but you need supportive soils in order to do that, right? Like I have a fear of abandonment and that's my job to take care of, but it also I need from my partner for them to remind me every so often and be a little bit more verbal with like I'm not leaving, I'm not going anywhere until I'm like kind of scarred that or scabbed that wound. But once you're able to kind of observe your reality, that's the first step. Like, what is my reality in the first place before I start placing expectations? Then, once these expectations rise, is it coming from love or fear? And then what in my reality do I have to change in order to be closer to that expectation? Yeah, it's that like I know it's hard with the concept of like creating your reality, but like really what's a current realistic reality as well? Like to say that Andrew's going to be a completely different person by tomorrow is not a realistic reality. How can I give myself grace and ease in order to let the transition, the life, death, rebirth cycle to happen and say the reality that I'm existing is going to die? Then there needs to be a moment of stillness, a moment of the void in order for me to then shift into something new. So you don't need to just accept the reality you're in. You don't need to make these high expectations for your reality to change. There is that little bit of wiggle room that you got to give yourself some grace and ease for.
I'm kind of, this is a total kind of side tangent thought, but I'm always playing in this realm of wanting to dabble in different dimensions and experience different frequencies through perceptions based on the dimensional
Mm,
access that I am being granted through whatever medium I'm choosing. Blah, blah, blah. As long story short, I like to jump from this reality to other experiences. And so
mm,
coming back to my very human experience, which is why I'm here, in addition to anchoring this high vibrational consciousness and helping humans wake up and tune into their own unique offering to the world, even if it's just simply by existing, which I think is the case for all of us.
mhm,
Um, I often don't like to be in reality because I've
mm,
been experimenting and playing in these different dimensions and perceptions. Um, Oftentimes it doesn't feel very good to be in the 3D. It feels heavy
mm,
and icky and mucky and murky and unknown, but also equally predictable, but predictable based off of programming that you don't resonate with.
mm,
And, Tara and I have talked about this a few times where it feels just really quite painful to anchor in high vibrational frequencies into a
mm,
very dense body. And so that's why it's super important that you care for your vessel in a way where you're sleeping, you're eating foods that align with your energy or give you energy that you need to sustain life. Um, you're really caring for your mind by not excessively drinking or doing drugs or
mm,
consuming or really, allowing yourself to go on these dopamine spikes that completely deplete
mm,
you from your sense of reality because you're existing in a state where you're on either side of your spectrum and not kind
mhm,
of just gliding to and fro willingly. It's very much a high and a low game. And so many of us in this 3D reality, and part of the program, I think, is to keep us in this like swing from high to
mm,
low. And I think that if you've ever experienced a twin flame relationship, it is the highest of highs and the lowest of
mm,
lows.
mm,
And when you often reach a breaking point where you say, I can't accept this any longer. And I just want to reiterate to anyone who's kind of in this swing of things that it's okay to not accept. Like, you don't have to
mm,
accept anything, period. I know it sounds easier. Hold on, easier said
mhm.
than done, but
I think that's pendulum swing too is the expectation and disappointment. Society creates.
ooh.
Yeah, society tells us we need to have these high expectations for what our relationship should look like, for what, like just what we see on social media, just what we see, what we're consuming from media in general. We're like, this is the goal, to have all this money, to like have all this fame, to like do all this shit. Here's that high expectation. Most of our reality is so far away from like, you know, what the media wants us to be, even if it's not resonating with us, right? We're told that's the expectation, and then we don't meet that expectation, or those around us don't meet that expectation, and we swing heavily into disappointment, and there's all this longing. Oh, I wish that I had. We tend to drip more into material things because the expectation is to have so much material things, because that actually takes away from our peace and power, right? To like just be
Mhm.
what is. So, can we release the expectations so that way we're not swinging so high, have hope to be able to, continue that pendulum movement, because there's that flow of energy. So, have that hope, have that faith, have that non-attachment, so that way when we're swinging towards disappointment, we're like, well, it's just not the right time, it's just not for me, it's just not for my highest timeline. And then we're able to kind of allow ourselves to have a little bit of movement instead of these huge swings. We're able to be in the center of that spectrum a little bit easier. And I know one practice, I'll just give like one tips and trick to do, is if you're really feeling like a heavy level of disappointment and you're just like, oh my God, all these things are just like not the fuck for me. I invite you to just like write them all down. Like give yourself like a set a timer and just like stream of consciousness, like all the things that make you feel disappointed or that you're not happy with or just don't resonate. And then cross out all the things that you cannot control, right?
Mm.
Other people's actions, the government, the state of the world, right? Like those kind of things that are so big and beyond us, but it still leads to our disappointment of society, of ourselves. Like start crossing those things out, and then you're able to look at what's actually in your control, and then you get to say, how can I change my reality within the control of what's mine in order to shift into something more aligned and let go of everything else.
Girl. No thoughts, no words.
There was one other thing that just came to me, is the concept of how many people are so okay with disappointing themselves. Like you set a goal or an expectation or a hope or a habit in mind, and you're like, I'm going to do this. And then you don't. And then it's okay. And you make excuses. Now, listening to your heart and your body is a totally different story. Listening to your intuition is a totally different story. Great example is Victoria and I here right at this very moment today. We were both feeling a little like busy, run down towards the end. And now there have been plenty of times where Victoria and I have said, emotionally, mentally, or physically, I can't show up today. And that's the beautiful thing about working with Victoria in this space, is we can work intuitively and say, I don't have the space for this today, and we will understand. But both of us had the space for it today. We were just like not having the energy, or like not really like in the space, in, like I said last time, not in the mood, not in the mood to do it. And we asked ourselves separately, do I have the space to get in the mood for this? Can I show up and not disappoint myself? Because I know that I actually can show up today. I just don't really like freaking want to be honest. I'd rather just sit on the couch. Um, but we didn't allow that disappointment on ourselves, because we know this is something that's worth it, and we actually end up feeling better in the long run.
Mhm.
So recognizing where you just allow yourself to like not show up for yourself because of all these excuses, not because we're actually listening to our body, not because we're actually listening to our heart, but because we're just like, oh, I'm not that kind of person. We're like, oh, no, I'm not the kind of person who could do that. Real quick, I hear that literally every day with being vegan. Oh, I'm not the kind of person that can do that. No, literally anyone could. You don't want to, and that's totally okay. But if you have this mindset of like, I'm not that kind of person, or it's okay that I don't do that, we get used to disappointing ourselves, and then we're more likely to let others disappoint us.
Well, I don't know, it's like an interesting area to play in because it ties into fear of failure, and I think
Mm,
failing is really important to do in certain
mhm.
instances, but how you respond to it and how you reset how you talk to yourself after that, because that's where a lot of really nasty self-talk starts to kind of weigh in, and that completely alters your reality and your experience
Mm,
with how you view the world. And how you view the world is how your reality is going to be mirrored back to you. So,
mm,
long story short, look in the mirror and tell yourself that you love you. Like, have you ever done I
mm,
love yous in the mirror? It is such a good way to just kind of restart the mind, even if you don't have the vocabulary to start going and whatever affirmations you want to feed yourself, just looking in your eyes and saying, I love you. 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 We're done.
I think we are. I'm like, I got nowhere else to go with this. Oh, can I tell
um,
you though? I feel I have laughed more in this disappointment episode.
no.
I think we did it. I think we spoke about disappointment without being really sad.
Or full of rage, which is when we initially wanted
Yeah.
to talk about it, we were just so
So, hey, look at us. Good for us.
ah.
Being able to kind of ride the wave a little bit more instead of having this rigid expectation. I mean, for sure as hell, I'll tell you that we've had very little expectations of ourselves for frequency frauds from the beginning. We're just like, we're just going to show up as we are and let it evolve as it is. Like, of course, intentional, but like, what's the expectation? The expectation is not to be like, you know, what they tell us
anyone
to be.
anyone other than ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that's it.
I feel good.
I feel good too. What do we have next week? Do we even know?
We don't know.
We don't know. Tune in because we're all going to figure out what's happening next week. Oh my God. Well, it was so lovely to have you here again. You know what? Okay, just saying that one line. I don't know why. I felt like I was in like a 90s kids show.
Which
You know,
one?
out of the box, like so long, farewell. Like I just mean like I'm just like, wow, thank you for joining us again on PPS. Wait, is that even this? No, it's
That's
PBS. Fuck. Guys, thank you so much. I hope this episode didn't disappoint. Hey.
wow. I
Oh.
feel like this episode might piss people off who are coming here to like kind of join the misery of disappointment. We're just laughing.
They're like, wow, misery loves company. And we're like, oh, fucking disappointment, am I right?